I wanted to start by showing a couple of objects. Um, this is, I may have done a show and tell on this in the distant past. I can't quite remember. I worked on a First National Bank. Yeah, when I first worked at Industrial Light and Magic in 1998, I was hired to work on this bank commercial that involved actually, the very first thing I ever built for ILM was a desk in 1/2 scale. And the reason was they wanted to shoot this underwater with a real shark, and they did, and they wanted the real shark to look absolutely huge. So they had a desk that the art directors had put together with like a blotter and a green banker's lamp and all that kind of stuff. And then they asked me to make the whole desk exactly 1/2 scale. It might have even been 1/4 scale, because now I'm thinking about it. The desk I built was about this big and the lamp was about that tall. That's like 1/4 scale. Okay, so then I went from building that desk to building this giant tracked vehicle that carved up buildings. And we actually built a building out of lightweight collapsible plaster so that we could carve into it with this big steel wheel. And when we were dressing this giant piece of earth-moving equipment, and our inspiration for this thing was like those giant strip mining machines that are like, the wheels are the size of your house and the entire thing is hundreds of feet long and it's got this massive blade that carves up, ahead of it. So that was our inspiration. And once we had finished the structure, it was time to add scale to the structure, right? So if I remember correctly, there was a mechanical team, Michael Steffi and some others, working on this hydraulic wheel that they could drive into a building practically. It was a real effect. And then once that worked, our modeling team, which was like me and Carol Bauman and a few others, dressed the earth-moving equipment to give it some scale. And this was my attempt at its control platform. And I was inspired clearly by crane seats. I love cranes, so I'm always noticing cranes, and I'm a big fan of the idea of sitting up there all day from that vantage point and seeing the whole world. When the Bay Bridge was being built, there was like 8 or 10 or 12 cranes lined up all the way across that span. Anyway, so I put this together in a fairly short order. I think this is one day of work for me. And it's mostly styrene construction. I did a little vacuum form of this top piece. The rivets are all styrene rod, which I sliced into thin slices. And this is absolutely like right up the middle of the kind of bread and butter model making we did at ILM. I had planned to put a glass window in here. And this was, my supervisor was like, yeah, go ahead and build the thing you're thinking of. If you can get it done by 3 when the art director comes by. And so the art director came by and was like, yeah, it's not exactly what I'm thinking of. So we went with something different. And my supervisor let me take this one home. And I love it because exactly as I said, it is a bread and butter example of the kind of standard model making we did at ILM. And as you could imagine, I loved projects like this. Now onto a very, very different kind of surface texture. This is a casting from a piece I built for The Mummy, the first Mummy film with Brendan Fraser. And my supervisor was one of the early women model makers, Barbara Afonso. And she asked me to make there was this huge piece of Egyptian architecture and it had this cove, and she wanted and it actually met on this cove. So there was all this stuff that had to look really big and scaled. So she asked me to make a 2-foot, 28-inch long panel of this detail, a little scarab press and these long stripes. And I sat there, I made a curve, I laser cut, I think, a framework to hold styrene in the curve that was necessary, this curve. Then I coated it in some rolled out plastiline, sulfur-free because silicone. And then I textured it. And if you look really close, you can see that there's some texture in there. That was all on purpose to add. And literally, like Barbara, I spent a couple of days on this, and like I'm sitting there with a stipple brush, and Barbara's like, "Great, yeah, keep adding it." It was this had to be able to look great whether the camera was directly on it or from 10 feet away. That was a frequent requirement. But I like the difference between these. These are very much the two totally different styles of model making. And then one of the things about model making is, like any job, a huge portion of it is impossibly tedious. I now, at this stage of my life, think of tedium as the holy tedium from which all good things come. And learning how to harness tedium, well, you know, the hyperfocus that an ADHD brain has is ideal for the kind of tedium that model making, or like I said, any other job requires. So when you're doing something super tedious, sorry, went off on a tangent. When you are doing something super tedious, you often need breaks to like remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing. It's nice to get up and walk around and kind of, I'll actually tell you a story. Years ago, I was hanging out with Rick Sayer from Pixar, and Rick and I were looking at this book of big ship cutaways. You know, those beautiful illustrations where it's like every layer of the USS Constitution and all these famous ships cut away, so you got to see their structure and how they store their food and their munitions, etc. And Rick and I were looking at this, and Rick said, let's look for the joke. And I said, what joke? And he said, nobody who had to draw a book like this could do it without adding in a joke, because it's just too tedious. You've got to do that. And he was totally right. We found on every double page spread was somebody pooping. Like that was the writer's joke. And sometimes it was just like a pair of feet sticking behind a door that you knew was a WC. It was that like subtle. So among the things that we would do is sometimes after you've done some styrene construction like this and you've got a bunch of styrene lying around, you may find that, oh, hey, look, here is a Darth Vader. I think this is from one of the TIE Fighter model kits. I can't remember if that's a TIE Fighter Darth Vader. Anyway, it's a seated Darth Vader, so we made him an outhouse. To be perfectly frank with you, I can't remember if I built this or Dave Fogler, or John Goodson, or somebody built it. It might have been me. It even has a little toilet paper roll in there. Yeah, look at that. Darth Vader pooping. That is the kind of stuff we would entertain ourselves with. When I was working on Space Cowboys, and I was detailing the inside of the shuttle payload bay from that movie, and for reference, the payload bay of that shuttle was that wide. 12 inches wide. And when Clint Eastwood walks out of the airlock into that payload bay, that's my model. So I spent 6 months detailing the inside of that payload bay. Every nut and bolt, oh my God. Because Clint likes to work, because Mr. Eastwood likes to work inexpensively, this one model had to suffice for every shot they had that involved the space shuttle. And we added in a lot of jokes. In fact, Peter Rubin, the art director, walked around, gathered the names of our kids and our loved ones and put them in some of the logos. And my kids' names have a logo that is in that payload bay. And then because I was making so many different objects to populate the inside of the payload bay, Peter made a logo for me that said "Savage Crap for Shuttles." And I stuck that on a little gold foil wrapped Mr. Coffee machine that I made. And I put it in this little out of the way place in the payload bay. Unfortunately, it was right in the frame where Clint Eastwood walks out of the airlock. So they had to remove my little joke and get rid of it. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support us even further, you can by becoming a tested member. Details are, of course, below, but it includes all sorts of perks, and we're building them all the time. You get advanced word and behind-the-scenes photos of some of our projects. Questions, you get to ask direct questions during my live streams, and we have some members-only videos, including the Atom real-time series of unbroken, unedited shots of me working here in the shop. They are weirdly meditative. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you on the next one.